I'm your hostess, Lani Nesbit. Today we're going to be talking with two of the reporters from the Modesto Bee who took part in the 10-part series on the Valley of the Poor. We have with us Karyn Houston and Cheri Matthews. Karyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about your personal background, and then we'll ask the same thing of Cheri so that we know you've come with credibility, and then we'll talk about the series that you did.
Okay. I've been a reporter with the Modesto Bee for 6 years. I moved here from Seattle. I worked for a newspaper up there. And I've covered social issues and human services types of reporting most of the time that I've been there. And I've done quite a bit of reporting on poverty issues and that type of thing.
Cheri?
I've been at the Bee for almost 12 years. And
12 years.
Yeah.
My goodness.
And in the years I've been here, I've worked on the copy desk, and I've worked most of my time in the features section. And I, too, have covered poverty and a lot of social issues and a lot of different kinds of reporting.
What prompted the Bee to decide to do this kind of a series?
Well, I think that it's something that we have wanted to do for a long time. Poverty is an issue that we've written about constantly, but we've never really done it in a large way, with a complete package like we've done. Susan Windemuth came to us last summer.
Susan is who?
Susan is the assistant managing editor at the Bee, and she came to us with the idea of writing the Valley of the Poor, and that was something that just struck a chord.
So how long, what kind of a preparation time did you have before you actually started the process?
Well, we started having meetings back in August, and it took about 6 months. And we had a team of probably 25 reporters and editors and artists and photographers who all came together to do the series. And we would meet each week throughout, well, almost every week throughout this 6-month period, and compare ideas and talk about what we had found, and compare statistics and share the information on what we were finding. So the project kind of evolved and grew, and it was very large. I think it's the largest undertaking we've ever had in a series at the Bee. But it was really what the reporters found out in the field, you know, what we came up with as we went out and talked to people.
Now, when you first started, did you say, oh, I want to cover this, and I want, or were you given assignments, or was it just kind of a free-for-all? You just all went out and gathered whatever information you could come across, or what?
I think it was fairly free. We each have areas of expertise. Cheri's done a lot of writing about children. We have another reporter who's done a lot of health reporting, medical issues. Another person concentrated on senior citizens. So we each had areas of expertise, but we were allowed to develop our own ideas. And then about 3 or 4 months into it, we all said what stories we were going to write. Another person wrote about the homeless, specifically, almost exclusively about homeless men. And so we each developed our own areas, and then we worked it all into one package.
So from day one to the actual printing, your reporting, your investigative reporting was how long approximately?
Probably about 6 months, and from August until the end of December, probably a 6-month process, which is really unique. Usually we don't spend nearly that much time on a subject, and it was also unique because it was such a team effort, the meeting and the brainstorming, and the time we spent out on the streets was unique. We didn't spend a whole lot of time in the office making phone calls. We were out there with the people.
Now, at the onset of this, were you given any boundaries or parameters that you had to follow, or pretty much just what you wanted to do? I mean, were there some no-nos that you had to abide by?
No, we never get an instruction or you know, a command, you know, find this or find that. Usually the reporter goes out and discovers what he or she discovers and brings it back to the editor, and then the editor says, you know, go with that. Usually the facts you find out, and the facts in this series were overwhelming about the amount of poverty that's out there, and that I think is not apparent to a lot of people. We would just go out and find it, and it wasn't a type of thing where we were, you know, instructed what to find beforehand. But a lot of this reporting we do from day to day. We've done stories on a family living in a chicken coop. We've done stories on the high number of welfare recipients and people on food stamps in the valley. So we would report those stories. We've reported them for the past 10 and 12 years. This was the first time we really took a long, hard look at those numbers.
So because of what you'd done in the past, you basically knew where to go to get the stories and who to talk to and what agencies to involve in this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us some examples of some of the feelings that, first of all, because you'd been involved in this before and you knew certainly more than I or most of the community would know about the extent of this, when you went out to actually get into it and spend so much time, were you surprised yourselves about the extent of the homelessness and the poverty, and or did you pretty much have an idea of what you were going to find?
Did you answer that one?
I think I was surprised. I think we live our lives day to day not seeing homelessness and not seeing the extent of the poverty in the valley, and even as reporters, we don't always see what's really there, and I think that once we took a real hard look, we were able to see it, and I think I was surprised. I think that I met a lot more people than I'd ever met before that lived in poverty, and I think I was surprised at the extent of it.
When you went out to do your reporting, did you find people very willing to talk, or did you find some hesitancy or reticence to expose themselves to this, or what did you find generally?
I found a little bit of difficulty on people maybe admitting their situations or having their situations explained in the newspaper. There was one person in our series who had AIDS and had already lost his job because of it, and to have further exposure would just be more than he could take. I think that 90 to 95% of the subjects we interviewed did allow us to use their names and to tell their story, but there were a few in there who were just embarrassed by the situation, or didn't really want it told, so we would work out something with them. But for the most part, people were willing to talk, but there were some instances, I think especially with children, where it's difficult.
Yeah, we thought it was important to use names and to take photographs of people and to use information that would share their lives and their lifestyles. That's what makes it real. But in some cases, especially with children, I didn't want to use full names. And even the children are embarrassed when they go to school that they live in the mission or that they're homeless. So there were some cases where we didn't use full names.
It was interesting in reading through your articles, especially with children, how many of them said that their friends had no idea their circumstances, where they lived, and that they had hand-me-down clothes, and that they had, just the food provided from the schools to eat.
I think 1 out of 3 children in this county, and Stanislaus County and Merced County certainly, are on public assistance of some kind. Isn't that true? And it really is pervasive. What our schools are dealing with and what teachers are finding in their classrooms every day, I think it's a lot of work for them. It's very demanding for them because these children are coming to school. A lot of times they're hungry, they don't have the proper clothing, and it's a big job for a teacher to deal with 30 to 35 children, maybe a third of whom have these types of problems.
And although it seemed from your articles that many of the teachers were aware of this kind of problem and were able to look into their classrooms and be able to pick some of these children out, I wonder how realistic that really is. How many teachers are just struggling just to get through the day with all of the problems, and how many are really aware of what's behind some of the behavioral problems, or the sleepiness or the restlessness or inability to concentrate really comes from this kind of a lifestyle. What do you think?
I think that they are aware. Diane Flores, one of the reporters, the education reporter, really took a look at the number of breakfast programs we have in the schools, and I think that they are bringing in as many of those programs as they can. They're doing a lot more health screenings of children. They're making sure they have breakfast. The school nurses are just overwhelmed with the number of kids that, they're making sure they're healthy, and they're busy, but I do think they're trying to deal with it. But you're right, it is an overwhelming problem. But there's probably good and bad teachers out there, but I do think that they are trying to get a handle on the situation.
I think it was in her report that I was reading about some of the partnerships that are being developed between businesses and health associations and the schools, where they can contribute some of the efforts and some of the work and donate some of the time and facilities that are needed to deal with this kind of thing. What a fabulous idea. Is this something that is beginning to grow in the community? Do you see that, or is this so brand new that you can't tell?
I think it's beginning to grow. She's done some stories on mental health programs and physical health programs that are done by the county, I think, and they go into the schools and they have a mental health worker who works with the entire family. Or if they check one child for TB and that child has it, then they'll check the whole family. And they'll give all of the kids in a family checkup instead of just the one entering school. So there are a lot of partnerships, at least with Modesto City Schools, that are happening. There are a lot of
Now,
them.
Karyn, what exactly was your subject matter that you covered?
Well, I kind of did an overview of sort of everything in the Valley of the Poor, tried to take a look at the big picture. I got a lot of statistics about how many people are on food stamps, and I talked to a lot of families, a lot of unemployed people about what it's like to go out there and look for work every day. And I tried to look at more of the big picture and the trends, perhaps, that are starting.
How did you feel when where did you find these people that you interviewed? Did you just walk down the street, go to the Mission, the Sunshine? Where did you find these people? Just
That's where we went.
I spent a lot of time just walking, and I'd walk around certain parts of town. I'd walk down to the Sunshine Place, which is a day center for adults. I wouldn't find very many children down there. Looking for children was more difficult because I think that they are kind of hidden. But several motels in town.
what do you mean by hidden?
You don't see them out on the streets. In San Francisco, you see homeless people lying on the sidewalks. Here, you don't really see that very often. I think it's kind of a hidden epidemic, and especially with children. That the children are there are more safety nets for children. That there are children at the Mission for Women and Children, and there are children in the motels that Salvation Army will help put them up for the night. So finding children was a little more difficult because they weren't out so much. There are certain parks where I could go, and certain places. But
were you ever afraid when you were going to some of these places? I know that there have been articles in the paper, in your paper, about people going down to under the bridge and taking clothes, and then the police will always have something to say that, this is really not safe and you really shouldn't do it. Did you ever fear for your safety at all?
No, maybe naively not, but often I traveled with a photographer, and I think that makes a difference. I think that the reporter who went down to the river and spent time there, I'm not sure how he felt, but he did spend quite a bit of time in the evenings down by the river. I spent a night at the Mission, the Women and Children's Mission, and I felt very safe.
Now, what was that like?
It was interesting. I felt it was really a kind of family-like setting, and I felt that everyone gave each other support. It's a 15-bed mission that is often double that or triple that in size. So there are often people sleeping on the floors, the whole family sharing beds. I slept in a room with 9 people and 3 beds. I didn't sleep a whole lot when you're not used to sleeping with so many people around, but it was very interesting. But I did feel safe there.
I would imagine that having the kind of background and lifestyle that these children have, there would be a lot of problems during the night with nightmares and bedwetting and crying or not. I just think about my own children when they watch a bad movie on TV, how we all have to go through a bad night with them.
I'm sure there is that, but I think even all children have nightmares and that kind of thing. These children were with their mothers, and I think that gave them some feelings of security, at least to be with a family member.
As you went around and you interviewed people and you saw the circumstances under which they lived, and you saw maybe the desperateness in their face or the despair or whatever it was that you found there, how did you feel about that? Just reading the articles, every day I would quickly thumb through to find that, and yet I would ask myself, do I really want to do this? I became so depressed over it, and such an incredible feeling of helplessness, like I wanted to just bring out my checkbook and, do whatever I could, and yet what can you do? How did you feel actually being there and talking to these people and that give and take that you had to have with them?
Well, I think that the feeling of helplessness that you describe is maybe the way that many of the people we portrayed feel every day. It is a sort of a struggle, and there is some of the forms you have to fill out, some of the paperwork you have to do, some of the hoops that you have to jump through are very overwhelming. And most of the people I talked to just wanted to get a job. I mean, they just said, give me a job that pays enough so where I can support my family. And the other thing I felt while I was doing this series was that most of us aren't really that far removed from this type of a situation. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people don't have health insurance. That's almost become a luxury in our society. It's difficult to get it. It's difficult to keep it. And I think that a lot of the people we saw, their problems were related to health problems, and they weren't able to have the insurance cover the bills, and then everything kind of spiraled, and they ended up in the situation that they were in. Glenn Scott wrote an article about a woman who was shopping and got in an accident and ended up having to spend her IRAs and her retirement money, and she really losing her grip, I guess, and health problems put her there. So I think that what I felt was, number one, that sense of hopelessness and helplessness, and the feeling that this problem really is quite large, and I don't think people realize how big it is. And also the maybe identifying with people to a certain extent, and knowing that the rest of us are not that far removed, even though we safely go into our homes every night and have our own little cocoons, perhaps we're not as safe as we think.
Not quite so secure.
Right.
I know that from talking with a lot of people that one of the theories out there is that a lot of these people really don't want to work. A lot of these people are there because of teen pregnancy, because of drugs, because of mental illness, because they're just lazy and they're idle and they really don't want to get a job, and they've been raised, how many multi-generations of welfare. And that the lady who was shopping, who got in the accident and was devastated, those are the rare cases. But generally it's just that they've asked for this themselves because of the choices that they've made in this life. How much of that is true, do you think, of the people that you have found, that you've talked to? As I read through the paper, it seemed to me that a lot of the people that were interviewed were teen moms, were drug abusers, had some kind of mental or emotional difficulty that got them where they were illiterate, undereducated, non-English speaking. It seems to me that there weren't too many people in your article who were there by fate, if one believes in fate. What did you find? How do you feel about that?
I think that's true, what you said. There is a wide variety, and it is drugs, alcohol. Teen pregnancy is a big problem, especially in this valley. We have one of the highest rates of teen pregnancies in the country.
Let me find this. I've got this here somewhere. Somewhere in there, 40% of the people on public assistance come from families headed by teen moms.
Most of the families on AFDC, which is the welfare program, are women with children. As far as the number of who are just lazy, I mean, who really knows? I talked to one priest who works with the homeless all the time, and he said every case is different. So we tried to go into cases without making a judgment, and what we found were truly the people that we found, and we just told their story, and you could make your own judgment as a reader from that. And Dorsey Griffith, another reporter, wrote an article, actually a series of articles about backlash, the backlash of poverty, and she addressed those very questions, and she talked to people, Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, about, are they just lazy? What's going on here? And she has some very good answers. That's excellent.
I think a lot of people feel that way. I think there are a lot of angry people.
There's a lot of frustration out there. There's no question about it.
But for all of that, there also are people that I talk to who just have so many obstacles in their way. They can't find child care. They can't afford child care. They aren't healthy. I think that there's a little of everything.
And I think as we discuss this kind of thing, and how many people now have it in the forefront of their conversation plate, I know that a lot of people are concerned with it. And as we begin to discuss it, we talk about, okay, what can we do? What is the short term? What is the long term? I think one thing that a lot of us are wondering is, what is the cause? What is really at the root of this? And my feeling is that oftentimes we see the crises in our societies rooted in the families. Families create societies, and societies create families. Has to do with low self-esteem, a lack of self-worth, I don't deserve any better than this. This is all I can get. We talked about before the multi-generational welfare check. This is how we live. This is how, you know, I think that many of the philosophies today don't teach. In our homes, we don't teach our children to serve and to love. We teach them to be served, and we teach them to be more concerned about what they're going to get and what their rights are than the rights of others. And we educate them to want rather than to be willing to give. And how much of that enters into this? And for those of us in the community who are trying to close our eyes and say, well, this really isn't that bad, or the government should take care of this, you know, reading through some of the letters that were written in, wonderful, wonderful responses from the readers. Much of it, this is what the government should do. This is what the state people should do. This is what the county people should do. How much of it are we willing to do? As you've traveled around, what do the people who are not on the receiving end, the people that you interviewed, what were their thoughts about what they want to happen for them? Did any of them provide realistic solutions?
Well, we, as part of the series, I think it was the second to last day, ran a whole bunch of letters and we solicited responses from people in the community who are not on the receiving end, but rather are taxpayers and business owners and homeowners. And you know, we asked them what they think the solutions would be, and they came up with a long list of answers, and they were very consistent in their answers too. And one of the most popular answers and the most consistent answer was that in exchange for the public assistance check, a person should work, do some sort of work. And
like Roosevelt's.
Right, WPA came up again and again. I guess that was a work project during the Depression. Or fixing roads, fixing streets. There was a real feeling that there should be work done for that public assistance check if the person is physically able to work. And another...
now, let me interrupt you there. The people that you interviewed, would they participate in that, do you think?
You know, we didn't get to a point of... I asked a lot of people, would you, you know, if you had a job, you know, of course they said they would work. But we didn't get to the point, and we're going to be following up the articles. In fact, we're having a meeting this afternoon, so that would be a good thing to follow up on.
Terrific.
You know, if given these solutions, do they sound good to you, and would you follow up on that?
Because the welfare program, it seems to me, in my ignorant state of mind here, that the welfare system pretty much pays people to not work. Taking the minimum wage that they would be getting and the hours of work that they would be getting, really if they stay home they can get virtually the same amount of money, maybe just a little bit less as if they put in a long time working.
It pretty much is, the welfare system, most people would agree, needs a drastic overhaul. It just doesn't encourage work. There are parts of it that do, like the GAIN program, which is relatively new. That's a government Greater Avenues for Independence, where they do have people go into work programs. But for the most part, you're right, I think it encourages
idleness.
Yeah, to a certain extent.
I keep wanting to come back to the idea that there is a cause for all of this, that even when we provide the jobs and even when we provide the housing and the academic kinds of education that is obviously so imperative to an overhaul of this problem, there are still going to be the emotional problems underlying with all of these individuals who've been raised in this kind of an environment, who have low self-worth, who don't know how to stand up for themselves, who don't know how to go for what they want, who don't really know and understand themselves. Has there been any talk about any kind of program to deal with those kinds of problems so that once they're physically on their feet, then they can emotionally become a viable, independent individual?
I think that GAIN program is addressing those types of things, sending people to school, and then they incorporate job seminars, how to find a job, how to write a resume, how to improve your self-esteem. And I think that taxpayers like to hear about those kind of programs and like to see people being encouraged to go to work. That GAIN program does seem to do it. I don't think it's that successful because the number of jobs out there that pay enough to get off welfare, there don't seem to be that many of them. But I do think that program is doing some good things.
And I know in schools, more and more of the schools are addressing self-esteem with the kids. Of course, we have to get the kids in the school, and we have to get them fed, and
Yeah.
Before you even get to that point. That's true.
what can we do as individuals or as groups to help this situation? I think regardless of how we feel about whether they should be on a dole or whether they should be working for their money, or whatever the long or short-term solutions to the problems are, there are still people out there who are hungry and cold and ill. What can we do as individuals in the community, or as I said, as groups, to help the situation? I know that there are many out there who say, gee, we had a family on our block who a few weeks ago sent out a flyer to all the neighbors and talked about your articles and said that they wanted to help. They wanted to do something. So they would come by the next Saturday morning and they would gather up anything that we would like to spare, food, clothing, blankets, whatever, and they would save us the trip down to the appropriate agencies. And so they did that, and I talked to the family afterwards, and they were just overwhelmed by the response of all these wonderful people who maybe were going to have this stuff as garage sales or whatever, but they decided to give it. That's one thing that we can do. What is that all that we can do? Just donate and give money?
I think some of the grassroots efforts have been wonderful. The calls I've had after the stories have run have been really, I think it's a start. People understanding the issue, becoming educated, and starting to think about what they can do individually. Beyond that, maybe you have some ideas.
Well, in the newspaper, we do list every week Lend a Hand column, which tells exactly what types of assistance different agencies need, and there are plenty of opportunities to volunteer. So that's kind of getting in on one level, but I certainly think that the level where the decisions are made are with politicians. There's no question about it. And if you have certain opinions about the welfare system and the way things are run, the person to tell about it is your elected representative. I think the system still works, and I think that that's the best way, is to let them know.
So we need to write so that we can guide them into leading us into the right direction.
It's a hot issue right now, especially when a politician is running for re-election. It becomes even a hotter issue.
And this is certainly a year for us to step forward and make our opinions known, because there are so many changes or potential changes that can take place this year. Well, I'm really grateful that you would take your time to come. The follow-up sounds wonderful. We'll be anxious to read about that. Let them know what we're doing, and that we really want to help. Let them know that the community wants to back this project and do something. I'd like to close by reading a quote that was from a homeless fellow named Cheri, Uncle Cheri, that was listed in your paper. If people would just come across the tracks and see for themselves that not everybody has 2 cars and a VCR and all that, that would be a start. If they didn't ignore us, if they looked us in the eye. Let's take the time to find out what we can do as individuals. We can no longer close our eyes and pretend that this does not exist, because it does. And like we discussed here, some of us may just be closer than we think. Let's join together as a community and help our brother, give him a leg up. Come back and join us next week on Another Look.